Coming up in This Week in Computer Hardware, Intel Compute Stick tested, ASUS Eeebook X2085TA reviewed, NVMe crushes AHCI, GameBench for Android on iOS, and more. Oh, it's all coming up next on TWiCH.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
Bandwidth for TWiCH is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 312, recorded April 23rd, 2015. Fire on your compute stick. This Week in Computer Hardware, TWiCH's weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most informative, most thoughtful, and occasionally even the most intelligent advice, buying guidance, and, well, answers to questions about PC hardware, Macintoshes, the iPhone, the Android universe, pretty much anything else we can have an excuse for testing. Mostly, though, we love the computers, especially the gaming computers, the home theater computers, and, ladies and gentlemen, the storage systems, and which is probably a good way for me to segue into our guest host this evening, Mr. Allyn Malventano, coming to you live from Florence, Kentucky. Hey, man.
How's it going?
I am full of mirth and good cheer. I got sleep last night.
That's good.
My body is confused, but and I'm running 8 gigabytes of RAM instead of 4 gigabytes of RAM on this system, and I'm no longer watching Disk I/O hit 100% because I have 150 tabs open in Chrome.
Awesome.
So that's even better. And, well, we should probably just fire into it. There's a whole bunch of cool stuff we're talking about today. First up, you just did the PCIe SSD Roundup, which is if you have all of the money and all of the time, or are these affordable human being type SSDs that you took a look at on PC Per this week?
Well, I mean, they're pretty cool. Part of this piece was the result of, we got kind of a scoop because nobody had tested the NVMe version of the Samsung SM951, which is an M.2 form factor SSD. Yeah, there had been a couple of announcements, like it was coming and it was in volume production, but it's an OEM specific device, and you usually have to wait for one of those things to come out, in something. And we happened to get an Intel NUC. One of the newer Intel NUCs in for testing, and one of the things that they were trying to show was working on that NUC was NVMe bootability, and lo and behold, this is the only NVMe M.2 SSD out there, so it came with it. And I liberated it immediately and, ran it through all the benches. And so if you go to, I guess we'll just go right to the meat and potatoes here. Go to the random performance tab of that review, which is like 4th page in. And go to like the 4th chart down, iometer workstation results. So I put the SSD 750, which we all know breathes fire, in with these results. That one is purple. The white one is an M.2 SSD.
Oh, wow.
Now, granted, it wasn't as fast in all of these tests, but that just goes to show you how much of a boost NVMe could potentially give devices, because the red line, or I should say the kind of pinkish line in that graph, is that same controller, that same kind of layout, same PCB and everything, but using the AHCI protocol. So, yeah, the red line there, it's kind of like tapers off pretty soon, and then the white one just keeps on trucking and actually kind of gives the 750 series SSD a run for its money, even though that one is, is just known for being really quick. And it actually bested it in a lot of other consumer or just like client simple kind of workloads, like just our file creation test, which is actually 1 page back from where you're at, and like the third and fourth charts. But file creations, it ended up beating the 750. So we're just creating files. We're just putting small files on the SSD, right? Now, granted, a 750 series would probably be going, would probably end up winning out if you were doing this to it all day for a week or something like that, right? Because it's enterprise pedigree in the 750 series. But if it comes to just simple consumer kind of, client workload kind of stuff, The SM951 was kind of cleaning house in the results. And then if you jump a couple pages ahead from where you're at to the power consumption, so we already kind of touched on, 750 and SM951 kind of sort of neck and neck. I mean, where the 750 is just going to annihilate everything is when you throw multiple threads worth of I/O at it. In other words, you have multiple apps and they're all just hammering away at the solid state drive. But again, that's more of a kind of enterprise kind of a thing, right? Normal people sitting at a computer, they're just running like a game, or they're running an application, or maybe a couple, but nothing that's hammering the SSD simultaneously. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see power consumption tests. Measuring power of PCI Express connected devices is not a fun thing to try to do. It involves soldering and very small ICs and shunt resistors and all sorts of lovely stuff and hours of time. But there's the result. White line on that is 750. Yeah, and you'll notice it's drawing about twice the power regardless of what is going on. They're both running the same workload, which is an ATO run in those two runs. Red line there is basically half, and that's the SM951. So it's able to do, kind of on par with the 750 series for workloads we were throwing at it, and still consume half the power. And that thing doesn't even have a heatsink.
So it's funny because because when I said PCI Express, drives, I was thinking of like full size cards, like the SSD, the Intel SSD 750.
There was actually a decent number of other PCI Express like card based. There's like an M6E Black Edition in that roundup. Right. There's a HyperX Predator, the new Kingston SSD in there, and they all just kind of get dwarfed by the now two competing NVMe products, right? They just kind of shoot way over all the other ones when it comes to random IO, and even they even get beaten just in the simple file stuff that we do too. So yeah, NVMe is really the way to go. But it still remains the trick to it is still having a motherboard that supports booting from that device, right?
And that's a pretty short list right now.
It is. It's
X99
and Z97 motherboards, and you still have to be cautious and check and make sure that the firmwares for those boards is says something to the effect of NVMe boot support. We did some testing. Ken ran around the office with the SSD 750 and basically plugged it into everything he possibly could find and boot, and just see what would work. And we do actually have a piece up at PC Perspective. It's one of the more recent pieces that went up a few days ago, talking about that. But every X99 system he tried, it worked. Every Z97 system he tried, it worked as far as booting. Everything else didn't, except for a really like this AMD system that we didn't think was going to work at all, but for some reason it did boot. Yeah. So that remains the trick to this. But you can always use them as a secondary device, secondary drive, if you want to have if you can get your hands on an SM951, if you see the NVMe version come out, even if your motherboard doesn't support booting from it, you could just have kind of an integrated, really fast game drive if you wanted to have that as your secondary drive. If you already have a decent SSD, keep that as your C drive, and then put the bulk of your other stuff that you're really going to hit pretty hard and you want to load very quickly on the NVMe device. And then you'd still be covered until the point where you upgraded your board to one that could boot, or your motherboard maker happened to push out a BIOS update, that added some legacy support for NVMe booting.
So X99, Z97, that AMD board, and then all you need is $475 for 400 gigabytes Intel 750, or $1,200 somewhere around May 23rd for a 1.2 terabyte Intel SSD 750. Are the Samsung drives even available anywhere?
So we've seen the AHCI version popping up on a couple of places, but you have to look for it by its part number.
Got
Not
it.
even really SM. You have to be careful. If you just look for SM951, there's two different ones of that same model, right?
Hate that.
One's AHCI, one's NVMe. So you have to look at the picture at the that lead picture in our article. Actually read the part number off of the thing. Google that, and then you can keep an eye out for the NVMe version. AHCI version we have seen pop up on a few places. It was going for less than $1 a gig. Similar to the 750. That we're hoping the NVMe version does as well once it starts showing up on some resellers.
That's just crazy. Now I'm sitting here like reading little tiny type and typing it into Google. So I'm going to stop that and go back to the podcast. Just being crazy. So NVMe, what you want if you're moving forward and you have the money for it. I mean, in terms of like boot times, are we talking about taking boot times from 10 seconds down to 4 seconds, or are you going to, is it going to be that much faster? I mean, it benchmarks ridiculously faster.
So some of the BIOSes are taking a few extra seconds to even initialize NVMe devices during boot. At least right now, I imagine they're probably going to, change that in the future, which future BIOS updates. So trying to calculate like a boot time from when you powered on the system to when you were in Windows, NVMe devices might actually lose right now, but it's not because they're slower. It's just because the BIOS is just taking a little bit longer to set everything up before it actually starts that boot process. So it's kind of apples and oranges right now for comparison, but everything else that these devices do, where they really excel, especially for NVMe, is basically you have to be hitting it with a lot of I/O, right? So when you do boot into Windows, I would say that if you're the kind of person that has like 50 icons next to the clock down there in the taskbar area, and all those things are launching when you boot, and you have desktop just a huge swath of desktop icons that all have to pull their icon graphics from each respective file, like as they draw to the desktop, all while all those apps are loading and everything else. Like that part of your boot is going to be, multiples faster on an NVMe device that can ramp up like that much higher than other devices. But as far as just like, opening Chrome, okay, it's probably going to be the same amount of time for both, right? It's when you really hit these things hard is when they excel for NVMe. So that's it.
No, I'm just laughing, trying to think of the character in the Marvel universe that's insanely fast and runs around. He might notice the difference in booting Chrome. And there I go laughing at my own comments. Samsung Magician 840 Evo. You were mocking me as I held up my 1 terabyte Evo drive that's going into a machine not too far from me because the firmware update had been released for this literally today.
Kind of today. It's in theory released today. There have been some people that were able to download Magician before it hit their too many downloads within 24-hour cap that it decided to implement. Right. And then B, even people that had Magician, they were kind of hitting, like Magician will just say that you're on the current version. Like it just kind of gives up. I guess it's timing out because Samsung's firmware holding server is just like getting annihilated right now with people trying to pull down the firmware. Or they've put some kind of same limit on that, the firmware downloads themselves as well. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's there. Some people have installed it. I was looking over at overclock.net forums. There's this huge, humongous thread about the Evo slowing down. It's like, I don't even know how many pages long at this point. But the people that did update ran some tests. They saw pretty much the exact same thing that I saw when I did our review. Basically, the read speeds of the files that are old kind of snap back up to the speed you would expect them to. And then Magician itself, provided you have the newest firmware installed on your 840 Evo, then gives you an option to do an advanced optimization. When you run that, it basically rewrites all of the data front to back, and I should say allocated data. Right, if there's empty space, it's just not gonna do anything with that. But it rewrites everything sequentially, which is key. That would actually speed up any SSD that you had used for a while because files get fragmented. Just like, I'm not talking about fragmentation like that you need to run Windows defrag because you don't really defrag an SSD. But this basically defragments the flash layer of the SSD. And that layer does get fragmented in the background, and it's not something that a Windows defragment could fix, or really anything other than rewriting the files can fix, which is cool. It actually ends up, the end result is that your 840 Evo, after say 6 months of an OS being installed on it, after hitting that, you have a button you can hit that would make your 840 Evo faster than your buddy that has whatever other SSD, and he'd been using his for 6 months, because that flash has been fragmented, just like every other SSD, would have had happened to it. So in trying to fix the dreaded slowdown issue that they kind of tried to fix once already and failed at it, now that the 840 Evo actually has like a one-up on some of the other SSDs out there, provided you're using that Magician software and every month or two hitting the advanced optimization.
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And it's funny because we were talking, we were going to talk about it later. I was going to talk it later in the show. Looking at Amazon.com, boy, if you take a look at the 850 Evo prices. Oh, wait.
Oh, yeah.
Did they go up? Oh, the 1 terabyte drive went up. No.
Yeah, I figured it was going to happen.
Just yesterday, you could pick up a 1 terabyte Samsung 850 Evo for $350. Today, it's $393. But the 250 gigabyte SSD is still $97. The 500 gigabyte is $213, up from $196 and change.
There was a deal on the 250 gig model at Micro Center. I don't know if the rebate's still there, but basically after rebate, it ended up being like 34 or 33 cents a gig or something.
Huh.
It was cheap, but it was only for the 250 gig capacity.
Yeah, and the 840 Evo is still $450, which is,
they're just
still
people selling old stock. It's,
so just I should have bought it yesterday.
Anymore. The 840 Evos are not making any more. You know that.
Drat. So frustrating.
Yeah.
In any case, just yesterday. Well, it's still though. I mean, if you're looking at $100 for 250 gigabyte drive, 500 gigabytes for $213, that's a fair amount of storage for most people for not much money. And that's for the 850 Evo, the 840 Evo. The prices are going up. Oh, I'm heartbroken.
Yeah, it's getting to that point like when you looked for DDR2. For like your laptop or whatever.
Yeah.
Once the DDR3 was the big thing and people were just like, it was actually getting scarce and there was still a demand for it, then the price started going back up. I guess that's what the case is now. There was probably a lot of people kind of banking and like watching the news on this firmware update that was coming out and like pulling the trigger and buying an 840 Evo if the price was low. Just figuring, hey, I'll get it and then I'll update the firmware and then it'll be good.
Right.
Kind of hoping that the fix works well, and from everything I've seen so far, it's doing what it should have done the first time around. Thank goodness.
I'm not sure which is funnier in the chat room. The Harley recommending a Western Digital Velociraptor or Web 5916 saying the Samsung Evos are the worst SSDs.
Oh, Velociraptors! There's actually a Velociraptor in the charts.
Those were so awesome.
There's a Velociraptor in the charts. A 1 terabyte model of every solid-state drive review that we've done, ever.
Yes.
Okay? There's been a Velociraptor in the results. It's the axis of this, it's like, there's like this just off color, like the axis looks a little weird, and then you realize that's a color that matches the bottom device in the list. And, that's a Western Digital Velociraptor. That's just like basically flatlined compared to every other SSD in the chart.
Of course, you also have like 1.4 million hours mean time between failure for the Velociraptors. The highest available reliability rating on a high-capacity SATA drive. 5-year limited warranty. And that crazy ice pack mounting frame, which is all thing. And then I choked to death on coffee on camera.
The funniest thing about those is we're trying to do NAS testing. We're trying to set up to do like large NAS testing, right? And you want to be able to build an array quickly. And the smaller your drives are and the faster they are sequentially, but like smallest capacity, right? The best thing for doing that kind of testing. Like I need to take this NAS and I need to make a RAID 5 and then do some tests. And now I need to reconfigure it RAID 6. And when you do that, it needs to do a build again, right? And it needs to be able to read all those drives front to back. So I ended up sourcing a box of 20 160 gig Velociraptors.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I didn't even get them from Western. Like I asked Western Digital, they're like, "What? You want what? We don't have that anymore." So I found some guy on eBay that was like taking apart a server farm or something and just like unloading them, and I grabbed a box of them. And I was like,
so
"All right,
funny.
I'm cooking now." So make my huge array out of 160, 160 gigabyte drives.
Could you cook toast on that thing when you were done?
No, those things are pretty power efficient.
Really?
Velociraptors? Yeah, I mean they put them on this huge heat sink. I don't.
Right. I just assumed because of the size of the heat sink that they were dissipating a fair amount of heat, but
Well, they dissipate more heat than your typical laptop size 2.5-inch drive, obviously.
right.
And they do draw power off the 12 volt input instead of the 5 volt. They just draw more power basically. That's why they wouldn't work on some laptops. But they did sell a model of that drive designed for 2.5-inch like SAS style, rack mount servers without that huge heatsink on it. But you had to have enough airflow going across them, right? So the really big heatsink was for the person that put it in their desktop system that needed to put it in a 3.5-inch bay way back when and had like 0 fans blowing across that thing, right? They were just trying to cover themselves, I guess.
Speaking of covering yourself, I think this is a shot across the bow of various and sundry. And when I say various and sundry, I mean AT&T, Verizon's fight. Obviously, this is a hardware show, but obviously you're probably aware of a certain battle over net neutrality going place in Congress and the courts and bars and backroom alley. There's a huge scuffle going on. And I thought it was so interesting that just around the time the lawsuit started really getting fired up about net neutrality, that Google launches something called Fi, which is their new wireless service, mobile wireless service, which is kind of crazy because depending on the plan or how many phones you're using, it can be for a single user, it's probably less expensive on Fi than it is on Ting, who's obviously been a sponsor and I've been a customer for a while. But essentially, Google's Project Fi is giving you access to either T-Mobile or Sprint's 4G LTE networks, some crazy worldwide availability, at least if you have the Nexus 6. They're launching just with the Nexus 6 right now. But you're getting all of this for something like $20 for the basic access, 30 gigabytes of data for $30 a month, and then like another $10 for every additional gigabyte of data you add. So if you were on a 10 gigabyte plan, you'd be paying about $120, which depending on your current cell phone plan may seem like a bargain, may not seem like a bargain. But Wi-Fi tethering's built in. It'll use Wi-Fi for calling when Wi-Fi is available, no annual contract. And if you don't use your data, you don't pay for it. And that's where it gets really, really interesting. Like Ting does the thing where, if you don't use your data, they drop you down to the next or the lowest data level. But they're essentially not charging. Google's not charging you if you don't use data, which is a huge deal compared to AT&T and Verizon and most of the rest of the mobile community. I think Republic has a similar plan to what Fi is doing. And if you look at
I like the way they do that, right? Because like they reimburse you.
Yeah.
That's what's cool. Like you pay for, your $30 for however much data. And then like, say you only used like, half of it. Well, you get $15 back. That's awesome. Yeah. Right.
One data rate in 120 countries around the world. A big thing, one of the things we pointed out, again, Ting was an advertiser, but one of the things we pointed out about Ting was that they gave you an interface that made it really easy to figure out what was going on with your account, how much data you had used, stuff like that. And, fi.google.com's website is doing the same thing. Google Fi, not File. Google Fi, boy, it's tough to say for reasons I don't know. Google Fi Fi is making it very easy to determine how much data you've used in your current cycle, to the point where I want to laugh because obviously Google's a software company, but they've done a spectacular job making it really easy to figure out how much data you've used. Something at AT&T has obviously spent a lot of time making it more difficult. There's no reason it should be difficult for me to get my data information on AT&T, but strangely enough, it does seem to be a problem for them to build an app that functions enough and does something useful like that. So I thought this was really interesting to come out, and I'm sure there are some interesting reactions from AT&T and Verizon are probably pissed. Sprint and T-Mobile have a big MVNO customer. I'll be curious to see if this accelerates the transition from sort of 2-year phone payment, pay your phone as you go or pay for your phone and more over time. And if people start buying their own phones, especially, I got to say, the Moto G and the Moto E are fantastic deals for the money. Not a great camera, but a tremendous amount of phone for the amount of money you're paying. And I will be curious to see how fast Google can open up Fi to phones other than the Nexus 6. So I thought that was kind of an interesting story to talk about this week. Just because it's so cheap if you use a lot of data. Because I did 14 gigabytes of data last month because we had to do a couple of video. I actually did this podcast on one marathon session and some video uploading, and I chewed through an unbelievable amount of bandwidth in 1 month. So you got to talk to Ryan yesterday about the Intel Compute Stick?
He wasn't on the podcast yesterday because he's off in some place else.
Some vacation place?
No, it's work. But Ken is actually the one that was toying around with this remotely at the office, remotely from Ryan. And then Ryan then wrote it up, not in the office. It was really weird how that went on. And now I am not in the office talking with you, who has never seen this thing, about this thing.
This is complicated.
Yeah, it's like Inception. Anyway, so Intel Compute Stick.
My top now.
Yeah. So this is basically like a Windows computer in something that's not much bigger than an old school thumb drive, except that port sticking out of the front of it there, it's not like a USB plug, it is an HDMI plug. So you basically, the idea is you plug this into the back of like a big screen TV, and you have essentially just plugged in a Windows machine into the back of a big screen and just made that into a computer, right? So pretty cool. It's a little bit on the underpowered side, obviously, because it's, such a small form factor thing, right? It's powered from USB power. You might be able to, it comes with like a short USB cable, I think. Let's see. Comes with like a dongle for HDMI so that in case it can't fit and like plug into the back of your set next to other connectors. And then it comes with a power adapter, which can power the USB port directly. But I think you can also, like, if you have a USB port in the back of your set, I think you could just kind of power it right off of the USB port itself, off of the same TV that it's plugged into already, right? So that's kind of cool. The weaknesses here is basically the same kind of weaknesses you would apply to a very low-cost laptop, right? One of those really budget laptops that come with like Windows with Bing and stuff like that you see come out for like a couple $100, maybe $250. Take all that, but take the battery out of it and take the display off of it and put it in a really small package. That's this, right? It's the same kind of slow storage. It's eMMC-based SSD storage, which is flash memory, and it's pretty reasonable at random reads and sequential reads. But anytime you go to write to those things, that they slow to a crawl. eMMCs are just known for that. It does have a micro SD slot on it, so if you're inclined to put something that costs as much as this device into it, in the form of a really high capacity micro SD card, if you really wanted to, you could. Has Bluetooth. Has 802.11 BGN. I think it's just a 1x1 radio, though. It's such a single channel wireless N on the 2.4 gigahertz band, not 5. So it kind of has its limits there, but those limits end up kind of balancing out with the fact that you can really only do 1080p video from this.
Which makes
we
sense.
tried. Yeah, basically that's where you run out of CPU. Is when you try to go over 1080p, right? We did Netflix streaming 1080p. We did Steam game streaming. To do that though, the wireless didn't have enough bandwidth over just that 1x1 channel. So it was actually kind of choking out on the wireless connection. But we did plug in a USB to Ethernet adapter, as if you weren't trying to cram enough stuff into this little package already. So we added Ethernet to it. And then Steam game streaming actually worked from another computer in the office, just streaming the game straight over to that, just that compute stick, just plugged it in the back of a monitor, basically. So it's $150. Comes with Windows 8.1 with Bing. 32 gig of storage. You're probably not going to be putting a lot of stuff on this. You're probably just going to be using it to stream other things, right? And like I said, 1080p is definitely like the limit. We tried even just 1440p, and it was capping out the CPU and started dropping frames on the video. So it can handle 1080p if you have a 1080p set, and you are the kind of person that really, really wants Windows hooked up to your set, and you don't already happen to have an old laptop to do it with, right? Because that's what a lot of people do. If they want to do that, they just take a laptop and stick it back there. If you don't have that stuff and you just want something really clean, neat, elegant, small, this is probably a pretty good answer.
It's funny, like $150, not the worst price. It's interesting to look at the compute stick versus the Core M5Y70, which is the fanless processor being used in some of the tablets. In fact, the T300 Chi from ASUS that I was looking at, it kind of gets spanked in the benchmarks, but obviously, and the low power benchmarks, at least until it's interesting looking at the multi-thread Cinebench render. It picks up speed, it starts to close in on Bay Trail, and starts to really stomp the TWiCH chips. But then again, the TWiCH chips have better graphics when you start looking at the 3D Mark graphics. It's an interesting part. I thought it was curious that Intel decided to do this, and I'm even more curious if they will do a second one, because the Nook's kind of finally picking up speed. And this isn't even...
it really just depends on how many people want that kind of a niche-y kind of thing, right? And then that's obviously what they're going to use to base if they make a second one or not.
Right.
But it's a chicken and the egg problem, because the second one would probably be much faster, with next generation parts and stuff in it. But it wouldn't happen if nobody likes the current one and nobody buys it. So we just got to see, I guess.
We wait with bated breath. Oh my goodness! One of our viewers, I was talking about the $200 HP laptop I saw at the Microsoft store. I was in the Apple store a few weeks ago, replacing the crushed and destroyed iPhone 6 screen before I got it into the giant bomb-proof case. And one of our viewers told us about when I talked about this HP $200 HP laptop that was pretty functional for $200. Told us about the ASUS Eeebook X2085TA, and different versions depending on whether you get it at, say, Target or Amazon. You have to keep an eye on the model number, because some of them are actually upgradable. Sebastian did the write-up for PCPer.com. How did he feel about running life on a $200 Windows laptop? Did he enjoy it, or was it a painful experience?
So I imagine it was a similar experience to that HP you're talking about, and it was also a similar experience to, believe it or not, the compute stick that we were just talking about. Because this is one of those $200 Windows with Bing, that kind of deal. Same thing, eMMC flash storage for the operating system. So again, poor Sebastian tried to do some copying, he unzipped something, and he used the Windows built-in zip thing. And when you go to extract with that, it kind of does the extract, and then it copies from the drive to the drive. And on the last page of the article, he screen capped it, and it was just painful. It was doing not even a meg per second of this file. It just was taking forever. So, and the other kind of really bad thing about this, if you had a compute stick and you plugged it in your TV, the color on your TV would probably be worlds better than the screen on this laptop, because on the middle page of the article, on page 2, the first graphic is the color chart result. And yeah, I've never seen one that bad. Sebastian was just flat out saying it was horrible. It's like the blue point in the triangle is like shifted kind of towards green.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, so the black triangle there is standard, 100% correct color, RGB color space. And that white triangle is what this panel is doing. Obviously, it's not, I mean, you can't even really say it's like, oh, it's only so many percent of it, because it's actually outside of it at one point. And usually what you see is just like the triangle is not as large, or it doesn't extend all the way out at some of the corners. This one, the corner is just like off totally. Anyway, yeah, so
excellent battery life.
It did have excellent battery life because, it's such a low power part that's in a laptop, and they just kind of threw it. That's kind of weird that they kind of were like generous on the battery. Right.
Yeah.
But
Sebastian said like 7 hours and 48 minutes of continuous use, which is really good given that it was the PC Perspective battery test. But also he had the screen brightness cranked all the way up to 100%.
Yeah.
Of course, he also said that the reason he had the screen cranked up to 100% is because the screen is actually on the dim side.
That's true.
He's hearing a lot of people getting 10 to 12 hours of regular use of this laptop, which is pretty impressive.
But I mean, it's a decent, if you're just doing simple productivity browsing, you're not going too crazy with this laptop. $200, man. That's like, think about that. SSDs cost more than that we're just talking about for just like one part of the computer.
Considerably
right? This
more.
is a whole computer. Yeah.
No, it's kind of mind blowing to get hands on with these. I like the conclusion. Considering how close this $199 laptop is to a really good product, I would be interested in seeing what ASUS could get with a slightly more expensive model. Noticing that the screen's pretty miserable, and more memory would be really, really nice. And that's been one of the issues.
We were joking on the podcast about just like taking that and plugging it into the back of the TV to get better, but instead of the compute stick, it's like compute stick or really cheap laptop. It's like, you're adding $50, sure, but you could then unplug the thing and just take it with you, right? So
and you still have more storage and better performance.
And most importantly, compared to the compute stick, a keyboard and a mouse. Because as Ken discovered when he was trying to set this up in the office, right, it only has one USB port on it. Mm-hmm. So he plugs in something to get keyboard, mouse, whatever, right? He has it plugged in, he's using it, and then he wants to do the game streaming, and he's like, oh, well, wait a minute. I need to plug in, I need a joystick or something, or just trying to set something up. He's like, oh, well, I'll just do Bluetooth. I'll set up a Bluetooth keyboard. Well, how do you hit OK in Windows to do the Bluetooth keyboard? You have to have a regular keyboard, right? Plugged in. Right. So it's just like this little hump you have to get over. If you bought this and then you bought a Bluetooth mouse and keyboard, you're dead in the water unless you have another keyboard, right? So anyway. The laptop would have already had a keyboard.
True, and you would have been able to set it up. GameBench compares iPhone 6 and Galaxy S6 in real-world mobile games testing. Ryan wrote this up. So GameBench came out in 2014, and the idea is that you're going to bring PC-style benchmarking to the phone. There's a lot of benchmarks out there for mobile devices, but they tend to be very like, hey, it's a Java engine. Hey, it runs in your browser. But this allows, GameBench allows Android users, quote, and soon iOS users the ability to monitor frame rates of nearly any game or 3D application you can run on your phone or tablet to accurately measure real-world performance. So GameBench released a report to look at the kind of data, to demonstrate or show off the kind of data that the software can gather while it's running on these apps. So they did Apple iPhone 6, Samsung Galaxy S6, HTC One M9, and the Motorola Nexus 6. Ryan got an early look at that and did a quick write-up on PCPer.com, looking at like Asphalt 8, Real Racing 3, Dead Trigger 2, Killshot, Modern Combat 5, Boom Beach, XCOM, Enemy Unknown, GTA San Andreas, Marvel, Contest of Champions, and Monument Valley. And it's interesting to look at the performance. The iPhone 6 does extremely well. not a huge jump, say, compared to the S6 or the M9 or the Nexus 6, but certainly leading the pack in almost every case. Modern Combat 5 iPhone 6 frame rates are almost 20% higher, it looks like, than most of the other games. Same for Dead Trigger 2. But it's interesting to see a new means of comparing phone performance. I think it's going to be interesting as people do more gaming on tablets also to take a look at the benchmarks on this and whether or not things like, hey, if you have a ridiculously high resolution screen, is that going to grossly impact your ability to play video games on your phone? And as silly as that sounds, as the mobile gaming market gets bigger and bigger, it's probably going to be a bigger and bigger concern for mobile users.
Actually, looking at those same results, the iPhone 6 is beating the other, beating the S6, but the Galaxy S6 has like 3 times the number of pixels on its display.
Right.
So, it's not doing too bad considering. Really. No. Yeah.
Not arguing. But it's also, do you really need all of those pixels?
That's true.
It's
really hard. It's really hard to see the pixels on an iPhone 6 screen as it is.
We did one that was essentially, I had a phone that was essentially a 4K screen in a 6-inch package, and it was, it looked like real life. You couldn't see the pixels without getting a loop on or without putting a loop on, but it also impacted the performance. So, something worth considering. I'm in love with Windows 10 technical preview, period, even though it nearly wiped out my productivity on my laptop for a week. AMD's Lisa Su expects Windows 10 to launch in July. Scott writes up on PC Per, the CEO of AMD is an unexpected but probably very accurate source when it comes to knowing the Windows 10 release date. First off, the news broke on a quarterly earnings call. When you make a statement on those, you have a strong legal obligation to be telling the truth according to the knowledge that you have at the time. Also, as a major hardware vendor of CPUs and GPUs, her company would have been notified by Microsoft so that they could plan development of graphics drivers and so forth. It also aligns with the summer announcements made last month by Microsoft. I think it pretty much summarizes that one.
Although we're not absolutely sure what they mean by release, right? Because I don't think they're going to be doing like the Gold Master RTM thing anymore, where it's like 2 months before you see it come out in anything else. I don't think that's really going to be a thing anymore, but it might still take them a few weeks or something, like after they say, okay, this is the release date. Okay, that's it. We're done with the code. And then they might still, do some testing or just give it another couple of weeks before they just throw it out there. Because I doubt they would just be like, oh, here, everybody. And then, it's everybody's system crashes because of some bug. And that'd just be bad.
That would be bad.
Yep.
So one more thing before we go. Friday, in theory, the Apple Watches start showing up. I know people have ordered several, but have not yet gotten a shipment confirmation. But should you be lucky enough, there are apparently 3,000 apps now in the Apple Watch App Store that went live earlier today. I found a BuzzFeed article on that. Not one of our usual sources of news, but certainly viable in this case. 3,000. Yeah, and Apple apparently chose quite a few as being sort of the creme de la creme of applications. And of course, I laugh right now because I had the list in front of me, and then as soon as I opened up the article, I lost it. Usual suspects: Twitter, the New York Times, Yelp, Instagram, with support for emoji comments. City Mapper, which shows fastest available routes on public transit, which sounds like an amazing app. Dark Sky, which I am hugely excited about. I'm a huge fan of Dark Sky. It is a Forecast.io application for iOS. That alone suddenly has me interested in the Apple Watch again. Pacemaker, Elevate, which is a brain training program, and Mint, the finance tracker. Target, or Target, as many people know it, gets a nod for its app. Lets them build a shopping list and then navigate to the aisle. I think it's pretty awesome. And
that's
ridiculous.
Awesome. I've been waiting for something like that for a long time. That needs to be for every store everywhere, like especially grocery stores.
The amount of time I've wasted in Home Depot trying to find the right box of screws, I'm definitely down with you on that one. Oh, my goodness. I'm looking. Sorry, I went to check a question in the chat room from Bobby Rolls, who says, "I pre-ordered the Intel Compute Stick. The day pre-ordering went live. Release ship date 4/24/15. I've noticed the date has now been changed on my order like 3 or 4 times without ever notifying me in any way. Currently says 5/25/15. One, that sucks, and two, sometimes that happens when the pre-orders, either the production doesn't keep up with the pre-orders or the pre-orders have grossly outstripped the original production, which is a little unusual for something like this. I wouldn't think they'd have that many orders for them. But
Yeah. I wouldn't think so either. They might have just delayed it a little bit.
I'll be curious to see how many Apple Watches I see this weekend, given that I'm here in the Bay Area and new Apple hardware tends to be everywhere as soon as it ships.
Well, I did not order one. My wife did, but it was the morning after we slept through. We were on the East Coast, and we're not going to alarm clock. 3
You want to be up
a.m.
at 3 a.m. to order a watch?
To order a watch. No thanks. Yeah, so I mean, we'll get one in, I don't know, like a month or something, or whenever.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll point her to that shopping list app.
Honey, you can help me find the men's shaving cream in Target. Then we can go look for.
You happen to see something hit me in the head from across the room. She heard.
She heard. That bright and cheerful note. Any last questions from the chat room?
Yeah, what you guys got? Anything quick? Although now that we said that, we gotta wait 20 seconds. And then the chat room is going to explode. And then we're just gonna have to like Russian roulette it.
I am enjoying the rude comments about how Home Depot is organized.
After that just horrendous data breach thing, I don't go to Home Depot anymore. Like I'm like
Target.
renovating.
You go to Target, and Target had a data breach.
I don't go to Target either.
Do you go to the VA? Didn't they have a data breach?
Well, I have to.
In a couple of years, everybody's going to have had a data breach, and it's not going to bother you anymore.
That's true.
You think to yourself, data breach. That happens.
But Home Depot's situation was their security was just so far gone. It was just like, I need to see a few press releases or stuff talking about like what improvements they've made before I go shopping there again.
That's reasonable.
Yeah.
Especially if you have a Lowe's nearby.
How much of a performance hit does an SSD incur when its native AES encryption engine is enabled? Usually 0.
Huh.
As a matter of fact, pretty much all the time 0. Because the AES engine works at the sector level. And so it doesn't really matter what multiple of sectors are passing through it. It just passes through the engine. And typically it's already in the pipeline of data. It's just whether or not it's encrypting. Actually, pretty much all of the Intel SSDs, all the way back to like the SSD 320,
right.
Which was a long time ago now, right? They all encrypt all the time, no matter what. It's just a matter of if it's using like the default key from the factory or a key that you gave it. That's really the only difference. Like they're just it's there. It's like it's already doing it. Even when you test it with the encryption supposedly off, but it's really not.
Valdi says, just now updated the Samsung Evo 840 firmware. Noticeable difference. Thanks.
Oh, it let you update.
Several people are pointing out. Oh, sorry.
I will tell the guys in the PC Perspective backroom chat that have been trying to update. It's pretty funny. Like
I just downloaded all the drivers off their website, so apparently they found more capacity, or they fired whoever got the cheap service that only let them download a certain amount. Yeah, I think they either they flipped a switch or they just kind of like surrendered to the backlash, because there were a lot of grumpy people. Like there were people posting on forums going, "Hey, you guys are all liars because mine says I'm on the current version and I'm only on like the C version, not the D version," because of the way that the updater would just kind of fall back and just say, "Yes, you are on the most recent version," and like really, like you're sitting there going, "No, I know there's other people updating. What the heck?" Right? Right.
Yeah, I think they kind of got the message and fixed something by now. You just got to
Eliz
give them a few
asks-
hours. Go ahead.
No, I'm just giggling. Eliz wants to know what these SSD hybrid HDs are. WD Black's pretty amazing, or the Black Squared, which is essentially, instead of having a bunch of cache on a hard drive, they're running essentially a 128 gigabyte SSD on a 1 terabyte drive. Allyn did terrible, terrible things in the process of trying to prove that was a bad idea and discovered it was a very good idea, at least in terms of performance.
I did. Look, it survived to tell the tale. It's right there.
It's a good-looking drive,
that
too.
is such a gorgeous drive. The way they did that PCB, that's actually the PCB traces, the backside of them where they're routed. And then the SSD part is actually like in the little thin slice in there. It's like hiding in that little wedge at the end of it. Anyway, yeah, it's pretty cool drive if you have that need, right? Like if you really only have 1 2.5 inch bay and you absolutely want to have an SSD and a hard drive, I mean, that's still actually a decent answer.
What's the price on the WD Black now?
Actually, it's been so long since I've looked that we would have to look. He's looking. I know you're looking.
I'm looking.
I heard the
Well,
clickies.
I'm looking for that price. Why don't you answer? We have a question about from Den. Said, I heard a Western Digital red drive is not in RAID, has a higher chance of corrupting files than a black or a blue. Is this true?
It has to have a bad sector in the first place, is the thing, right? So the difference between a red and a black / green / blue / anything that's not a red or an enterprise model is this thing called time limited error recovery. And that basically the SSD, my goodness, I got those on the brain too much. The idea is that a regular hard drive that was in a computer that was meant to just be a single drive that you have all of your important stuff on, it'll do everything it can to get a bad sector back to the point where it might time out some stuff, right? Windows will like let it go for like a minute or two, right? If you ever had a hard drive failing, you'll notice that your OS will just start just like hanging and just like not doing stuff for like a minute or two at a time, depending on, you know, how long that SSD takes, or I'm still doing it, how long the hard drive takes to just give up, right? RAID controllers do not like waiting that long. If they see no data come back from a hard drive for more than like 15, 30 seconds, 20 seconds, something like that, depending on the RAID controller, they just give up and they say, oh, that hard drive's failed. And that's a bad thing if you're in the middle of already swapping out a bad hard drive and you're trying to do a rebuild. And you don't want like one bad sector on one other disk to totally basically take your whole array offline at that point. Because that's what would happen if the drive did not time out faster. So the only way that you're actually going to get corrupted data is you have to make like an assumption, right? You already have a bad sector. You already have something the hard drive is having a bad time reading for whatever reason. And it might have gotten it back with a consumer drive if it had given it a few more seconds to try. But that's the only difference, is you're just giving it some more time to try. I think the TLER, I think the time is like, it's either, I think it's like 2 seconds or 8 seconds or somewhere around there on the reds. So, and it tries like a lot, like the head passes that sector a lot of times in a 2 second period, right? So if it can't get it in that many retries, chances are it's like it probably wouldn't have got it anyway. So, you know, it's probably gone either way. I personally don't have any issue using a red in like just as a singular drive in an external enclosure. If anything, like one thing that I would say time limited error recovery drives help you with is there have been plenty of times where I've tried to recover data from a just external hard drive that's been dropped or it had some kind of a head crash or something. And if you're trying to do data recovery, the idea is you want to be able to read the whole drive front to back and make an image of it and then use some forensic software and try to, you know, comb through it later and see what you can resurrect out of it as far as your data goes. And the regular like green style drives will take forever to pull that image if they have too many bad sectors on them, right? Because every single one has to time out. And that just takes forever. Whereas if you were using a red, at least you would make it to the end of the drive, making that copy, within days versus weeks or months, basically. So could be handy, right? It could actually be handier than. I personally think that TLER should have been something that was in hard drives for forever. Like it should just be in all of them. My own opinion, though.
Right. As an update, the WD Black Squared or WD Black 2 dual drive 2.5 inch 120 gigabyte SSD plus 1 terabyte hard disk drive kit, which is pretty fantastic. It's got basically it's everything you need for that Western Digital Black Squared drive to transfer your existing drive onto it. It's got a cable. That's what makes it a kit. It's $129.28 fulfilled by Amazon.
Bad.
No. Given that a 1 terabyte SSD is going to cost you the better part of $400, that's pretty fantastic. One last thing before we go. Almost Working says, I'm going to build a FreeNAS for the benefits of ZFS with ECC RAM. Hope Allyn might mention the benefit of ZFS versus Scary RAID. Technically, ZFS is kind of a first cousin to Scary RAID. It's just much better implemented. It also requires, if you want the full benefits of it, about 1 gigabyte of memory for terabyte of storage you're using on the FreeNAS.
The big deal,
fair amount of performance.
The big deal with ZFS is getting rid of this thing called silent data corruption, or basically just a bit gets flipped on something. ZFS has means to figure that out and fix it, right? I will say that ZFS is not the only thing that's pretty good at that. Windows storage space is actually pretty robust, especially if you format the partition with REFS, which is aware of the fact that it's on a redundant storage medium. And Windows can actually do like those corrections as well. As long as there is another copy of the data, it can do that. Hey, this CRC, this checksum is bad on this one sector that I just read, but I have another good one here. And it just, like that Windows with storage spaces, it'll just correct that stuff in the background and it'll just put it in the system log, and you wouldn't even known that, there was bad data. It just fixed it seamlessly. ZFS is much more flexible though. Way more options, but you have to really be a person, like Almost Working. That's probably going to be almost working like under the hood of that thing, trying to, get it configured just the right way. When it comes to storage stuff like that, like I don't like tweaking stuff.
Right.
Like I don't like having that many knobs to turn, because the more knobs there are, the more I will want to touch them while all of my important data is on the thing, and then it will go boom when I touch the wrong knob. Yeah, that's just me. Like when I set up a RAID, I configure it, I initialize it, everything. I make sure I get it exactly the way I want it when I started, and I'm even hesitant to add disks and do Storage Spaces handles it differently, but like with hardware RAID controllers, I'm hesitant to add disks, even if the RAID controller supports like the array rebuilding on the fly with more disks to add capacity and stuff. I avoid that stuff like the plague. When I set up a RAID, it's like that device with the RAID or whatever ZFS or whatever it is on it. Once it's set up and configured, it doesn't get so much as sneezed on until I decide to build something completely different, and then copy all that data over to the new thing. And then even then I'll let it go for a week where I have both devices up simultaneously.
Right. And
just to make sure nothing blows up on the new thing. And then usually the previous one will turn into a backup for the new one. So that way, you have at least 2 copies, right? 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1, whichever way you want to say it for your backup stuff.
3, 2, 1, or 1, 2, 3. It's all good. Just back up, people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but
as far as
generally speaking, though, as far as like the silent data corruption thing, I maintain like checksum like databases and stuff of like files that are in archival storage on my arrays, and I have had the same data set go from like a RAID of like 1 terabyte greens to like 3 terabyte reds to now 6 terabyte reds, and like even passed through like a Drobo Pro at one point. And all those transfers and everything, I haven't had so much as a single file corrupt. So, and we're talking, I mean, all my stuff is like almost 30 terabytes worth of data now. So I haven't had so much as a single thing go bad, single bit flipped, at least of any of the files I was checking, which is a decent amount of data. So my argument there is as long as you have decent hardware, and I haven't had ECC RAM in any of the systems that I've done these things on. But I never overclock the system that's doing the NAS stuff, right? I never really push the hardware. I'm always running it, at straight laced as possible, really. But yeah, it is possible, but it hasn't been so like frequent for me personally that I'm like, oh my goodness, I absolutely have to switch to ZFS. Like if it did happen to me a lot, I would be running a ZFS,
right,
NAS box in my own house.
And if you don't want to deal with lots of options, and the learning curve on FreeNAS is kind of steep. Take that from somebody who had lots of people who are hardcore FreeNAS community members who just beat me up with a stick because, for example, I didn't use ECC, which some of the lead developers on the project think is overkill. But if you need a NAS tomorrow, buy a QNAP, buy a Ficus. Buy yourself a Synology RAID box. If you want to experiment and learn, then FreeNAS is pretty amazing. FreeNAS is pretty amazing, period. But it does require a fair amount of horsepower to do all the cool stuff with it. So,
yeah,
dude, so awesome to have you on. Is there anything you can tell us about that's coming up on PC Per? Any sneak previews you can give us?
I'm working on a huge enterprise SSD roundup. But they're all like SSDs that have all been launched. It's just a matter of really kind of taking testing to the next level. But with enterprise testing, it's all synthetic. So it's not going to be very interesting, but we're trying to make it interesting. And like trying to make it interesting down to the point of showing you steady state IOs per second of like every SSD that we test, but doing so on like a scatter plot that is plotting every single IO.
That's pretty crazy.
Yes. So not just like, here's the average every second. Mm-hmm. No, I want to show someone like, here's a second worth of IOs at steady state, but every single one of them that happened is on this graph, and here's all their latencies. So that's the kind of thing some people really want to know, right? They want to know, like, I wanted to make sure no IOs are longer than X. Let me get an actual look at how these look. And if I think it's going to be pretty interesting when you compare them all against each other. But I have been just blowing up some charting, spreadsheet programs. Like I'm definitely at the limits of several of them. If anybody in the chat knows really awesome / easy to use data charting programs that can handle enormous data sets, then
oh my goodness. Michael found
one
that's online and it's insane.
I think Ken was toying around with that one, but I think we were breaking it with the amount of data we were trying to upload to it.
But we know the lead developer on it. All right, I'll email Michael. We'll get that. We'll get that going. Hey, everybody, we should probably scoot before Allyn and I go down the online data plotting rat hole, to say the very least.
Yes, that is
rabbit hole. This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware. You can find more of us on twit.tv/TWiCH, where you can also learn how to subscribe, get all the feeds, or just search inside of iTunes for TWiCH. And I want to thank each and every one of you for listening and sharing the show with your friends and coming back to join us and sending your questions. And on that bright and cheerful note, I got to say thank you so much for listening to this episode of TWiCH. I'm Patrick Norton.
And I'm Allyn Malventano.
And we'll see you next week on TWiCH.